Great.
Thank you.
Well, welcome everyone. Today, I'm really pleased to be here and to be sharing a little bit about my thoughts about the job market timeline and preparing your packet. So it's August 24th. So the question that we have in the timeline is, where should you be? This is ideally, of course, 2020 is a crazy year, but a job market paper, you should have a full draft done. Now, this doesn't mean that every I has been dotted, every T has been crossed, every robustness check has been run, but this does mean that if a job that you're interested in comes up tomorrow and you have to submit an application this week, that you have a paper with an introduction, a conclusion, a method section, lit review, you've taken out all those bracketed notes that you leave for yourself in the middle, right? And you could send that off. Now you'll continue to work on this paper and you will likely continue to work on it after you have finished your PhD as well, okay, before you submit it. But this means you're ready to submit something if something comes up. Letters of recommendation. At this point, you have your writers lined up. You've made the ask, they've said yes, and they have some semblance of what's to come and when they're going to be expected to write letters. Got to give lots of time for that this year because it's just a year with lots of pressures. Application packet materials. I'll talk about those a little bit more in a second, but you're going to be starting some drafts, right? You've got some materials ready, again, in case that dream job comes up right away. And you've got a professional looking website and an updated CV posted. Now, this does not mean that you need to go pay someone for pictures, okay? You can get your significant other, your roommate, whoever, to just take a professional looking headshot of you, okay? And you can get a free website from Wix. You can work with your department, put some info up. This is especially important this year to have that virtual presence because our entire job market is likely to be online. So if you're thinking about application packets for US faculty positions, these packets, there's kind of a standard packet that you probably have heard about. And these tell the story of who you are. And I think it's really key to have kind of a narrative to this that is central to your whole packet, okay? So this includes your cover letter, your CV, your teaching statement, which is different from teaching evidence of teaching effectiveness, which is generally a summary of your quantitative and qualitative evaluations, if you have those from teaching, and then your research statement. Also, I like to remind students to keep in mind that depending on where you're applying, there might be other kinds of documents that are requested, and you want to be thinking about these ahead of time so you're not doing them at the last minute. Religious institutions might ask for a statement of faith. Increasingly, and I think especially with what's going on in our society this year, there'll be requirements for statements of diversity. And if you're interested in extension positions, which we heard in a previous panel from AEA, I think last month, if extension positions will be more, might be where we see some jobs this year. With extension positions, you might actually have to write a statement of extension. Okay, so these are all going to be potentially key things for you. I'm sorry, are we having some trouble?
No, I'm sorry. That was just my homeschooling issue.
There are going to be, that's a great time to remind everyone, there are going to be so many distractions this year, and we all have to give ourselves some forgiveness around that because it's just going to be a really tough year for that, and we have to create space for that. So the other things I want to talk about briefly is because we anticipate there being fewer jobs in the academic faculty market, you need to be thinking about the kinds of documents you might need for other applications. So for some postdoc positions, there's a research proposal, right? So this is taking your next project, thinking about what's your next project and writing it out into a proposal. For some industry or consulting jobs, they'll ask for a resume. A resume is not the same as a CV. I do encourage you to look to your career centers on campus for their sessions for graduate students, and they usually have some really great resources to help you with this. Understanding what goes in a resume versus what goes in a CV and how that differs across industries. Also, if you're looking at data scientist positions, coding examples or coding exercises are likely part of the interview process, if not the application. So make sure that when you put on your CV or your resume that you know how to do something, that you are prepared to do that immediately. And finally, non-US academic positions might have different requirements, so it's important to know what those are. For example, The European CV format, I'm told, is different. I have not been active on the European market, but if you are interested in applying to European jobs or Chinese jobs or jobs elsewhere in the world, you should work with people who know those markets to understand the specific requirements. And then this gets to that next point, do your homework, right? If you aren't getting the information you need about particular jobs from your committee, from your department, you might need to look elsewhere, okay? And this is this classic problem of self-selection where those of us who are in the academic world know the most about the type of jobs that we have, okay? But that's probably the smallest kind of group of jobs, just in terms of the share of jobs available. So some ways to find out about other kinds of jobs. First, conduct informational interviews. There's lots of guidance online and again at your university's Career Center about how to conduct an informational interview. Essentially, this is like a 30-minute call you set up with someone and you ask them questions. What does your job look like day to day? What, what do you get to do research outside of your position? Do you work 9 to 5, right? You can ask all of those different kinds of questions. And then also meet with faculty in your department who can help, who might not be on your committee. Say you're interested in the Chinese market and you don't have someone with expertise of that market on your committee, but there's a faculty member who is Chinese or regularly works in China. Set up a meeting, say, I'm really interested in the Chinese market. Can you help me out? Don't be afraid to do that. People want to help you succeed. And then not all information about jobs is going to be on the main websites like Joe. So join the AAEA section listservs like CWAE, like COSBE, the listservs that are relevant to your topic of interest and expertise, and you'll hear about more things that way. You can also join Econ Twitter. On CWAE, we love Econ Twitter, but it's a huge time suck. So do be careful to make sure you're meeting all of the demands on your time. Okay, so I said it's August 24th. It's crazy. It's almost September. We can't believe it. What lies ahead? Well, the job market is likely to be fully online, including virtual flyouts. So the AEA, which normally runs the job market in January, is advising interviews to be on the usual timeline, but this is likely going to be influenced by, I believe, by individual employer budgets. So when somebody has a position available, my best guess is that they'll just try to hire for that as soon as they can in case something changes at the university. So expect the unexpected. Be prepared so when the job you see that you're interested in comes along, you're ready. And really basically anything can happen in the US and the world in 2020, and you might have bad days. I guarantee that there are going to be bad days. And that means that you need to be prepared for that and maybe, take advantage of the time where you're feeling focused and productive and functional so that when you have those days when you need to curl up in your bed and watch some escapist television, or you have those days where you feel like you need to be out and doing something as a citizen or as an immigrant and a visitor here and passionately talking about the issues that are occurring in our country, you have the time to do that. So be prepared, practice always, and expect the unexpected. That's it.
All right, thank you so much, Zoe. That's super helpful. For attendees, please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A now, and we'll circle back around to them if you don't want to forget them as we see the other presentations. Panelists, hopefully you're able to use your video now. So when it comes your turn, if you don't mind turning on the video, that would be great. So up next we have Titus Awakus, I hope I pronounced that correctly, from Michigan State University, who's going to be talking a little bit about interviews and flyouts, which of course may look different this year, but I'm sure there are some universal sort of tips about how you want to prepare for those moving forward.
Can you hear me? I still cannot share my video. Are you able to hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I'm still unable to share my video.
Now, can you?
Okay, I think now, yes.
Okay, great.
I have just one slide. I think I'll try to show that.
Thanks.
So I need to share my screen here. Everybody see my screen?
No, not yet.
Hmm. I only have one slide and it's having a hard time sharing it. Okay, let's see. Share screen.
Oh, there we go. Great.
Right. Can you just see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, I'll go with that. Okay, very good. So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to speak to you about a very important part of the job search process, which is actually getting to visit university campus. Even though we're dealing with COVID-19 right now, I'm assuming that by the time that many of you get on the job market, that you actually get a chance to visit campus. So I'm going to talk like if that is the case. So when you get a chance to visit a department, that means that a few things have already taken place. It means that the search committee at the institution have already been impressed with you. So going in, you need to go in with that confidence that somebody looked at your CV and they really like you and they think that you'll be potentially a good fit for that position and for that department. So it's very important to be confident, but not be overconfident. So you don't want to portray yourself as someone who is arrogant, but you want to be humble, but at the same time be confident in your abilities and what you bring to the table. So having said that, going in with the right attitude, you also need to be very prepared. And what do I mean by being prepared? And I've seen quite a few job candidates over the years. I think the best job candidates are those who are prepared in terms of the job market paper, but beyond that, they are also prepared for the department and the university that they're visiting. No one expects you to be an expert on everything regarding the university or the department that you're visiting. But at the very least, you need to know a little bit about that department. I've seen some people who have come for a job interview and they don't know anything about our department. Usually faculty in the department are not impressed with people like that, even if they have a very strong record, because that is an indication to us that maybe you didn't really care about our position. And if we end up choosing you as a final candidate, that maybe you may not come. So it's very important for you to know a little bit about the faculty and what the department is known for. If the position that you're applying for has research, teaching, and extension as part of it, you need to know a little bit about what the department does in those key areas. So for example, if a department is well known, like my department, for international development or for environmental and resource economics, it will be important for you to know at least a few people in the department that are well known in the profession. It's also important to check out the websites to know a little bit about the state, especially if your appointment has some extension expectations. If you don't know, for example, that the state that you're applying for a job in is well known for specialty crops, like in the case of Michigan State, that is a red flag that you haven't done your research. So it's very important to have done some research before arriving on campus. The other point I want to make is about expectations. When you are visiting a department for an interview, there are several things that take place. There are lots of meetings. It's usually over the course of 1 or 2 days. You will be meeting with the faculty as a group. And in many cases, you will also have the chance to meet with some individual faculty. You'll be meeting with students, administrators, and staff. One advice I will have for those who are on the market is that you want to get a sense for what kind of questions they may be asking you. Now, a lot of things will be revolving around the job seminar. One thing that I've noticed in recent years is that a lot of candidates are very well prepared to talk about their research and their paper, but they usually, some don't do enough preparation about questions regarding teaching or extension. So I would say that as part of the slides for your seminar, yes, talk about your research, but also say a few things about your teaching philosophy. If you've taught before, say a little bit about that too. And if your position has an extension component to it, talk about your vision for extension and how you plan to approach that. So it's really important to be balanced there. One major mistake that I've seen some people make is that they come without questions. They come into the interview assuming that they will be asked questions, but they don't need to ask questions. I think that one of the ways that you show that you're really interested in the position and that you're well prepared is to have some questions for the individuals that you're going to be meeting. So if you're meeting with faculty, have some questions that are relevant to them. For students and administrators, it's important to also have questions for them. I will close with a few comments about meetings with administrators. In many positions like this, you will have the opportunity to speak to the department chair for sure. In some other cases, you also get to meet with the dean or a deputy dean or someone in similar capacity. I think it's important to put yourself in their shoes because in many cases, the administrators that you're meeting outside of the department may not be ag economists. So the kind of questions that they'll be asking you will be more general in nature. So you need to be prepared for those kind of questions so that they have a good sense of the work that you do and they can also see you as a colleague. I think overall, the mindset to take into this kind of meetings and visits is that you're going into the department to learn more about that department, and you're also giving them an opportunity to learn about you. So it's a two-way street. It's not just you who is being interviewed, you are also interviewing us as a department. And that's one of the reasons why it's very important that you have really good questions prepared ahead of time to ask us. I will leave the rest of my remarks to the question and answer session. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. I'll just add, I agree on with the comments about questions, that is actually a very important component of the flyout and the interview. It's where you signal your interest in the department and the institution. So it's also a time where you want to be cautious about asking questions that might force some kind of negative answer, right? So this was the coaching I got, right? If you ask, oh, how many seminars do you have a week? And the answer that you get is just one, right? Or you say, when is your environmental seminar? And they have to say, we don't have one. the phrasing is not as good as if you say, you know, could you please tell me about the seminars that you offer? So an opportunity for the department to give you positive reinforcement about why you would be happy in that position. All right, so next we'll go to Anna Josephson, who's going to talk about negotiating, thinking about pay equity issues, dual hires, and non-salary support.
Okay, can you see my screen? Uh-oh, it seems like you can't even see me.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
okay.
Yes. Hopefully you can
goodness.
share your video now too.
Yes, I hope so. I clicked the indicator to share it. Is it not appearing?
I see your screen, just not your video.
Not my video. All right, let's see. Okay, I'm not quite sure what to do about that. My computer says I'm sharing my video, but I can see it's just black. Let me reset something on the settings. Sorry. Let's see. Nothing. All right. Well, I will not waste any more time. I will start talking. Thank you for asking me to speak. I'm sorry my video doesn't work and my internet connection is unstable, so it's a bang up start here. I'm going to talk very briefly just about hiring and negotiating, and I'm specifically going to talk about the context of dual hires since that is the only framework that I have for this. My partner and I are in the same unit. We're in the same field, do a lot of work in the same subfield, so it is a bit of a challenge to hire us, but we both have 2 tenure lines here at the University of Arizona, so it is possible for that to happen. So I have 3 bullet points, since I think a lot of the kind of advice that I had or thoughts that I had were covered by other speakers and are more general advice for the job market as well. So the first thing is, as Joyce just reiterated again, ask questions. Be sure you have your questions sort of set out in the framework that you're going to start with. And even prior to that, do research so you know what you're walking into, especially if you're thinking about a dual hire. Many universities have, at the very least, their formal policy posted on websites. And so you can start to see what opportunities there might be in the negotiation process for accommodating a spousal hire. When I brought these points up to my husband yesterday, he was like, yeah, but most of those are like kind of fantasy points. And so that's kind of fair enough, but it's nice to know what the university is officially putting out there. I also found when I was starting to apply, Jill McCluskey's work on dual hires in the academy really helpful, even for just knowing what's possible and what's common and what's spread about universities. So that was sort of the first thing, is be prepared, and perhaps be more prepared on this point than if you're walking into this position as a solo person. The next thing is be clear about your objectives and your compromise point. And this is, again, true for all jobs, I think, but especially true if there are 2 of you trying to figure out what your future is going to look like. And so this is about sitting down and having a conversation with your partner, and this could be internal to the academy or external to the academy, and saying, okay, we're happy living here, or we won't live here, or we both need 2 tenure lines, or one of us will be very happy doing a mostly teaching position while the other one only wants to do extension. And so figuring out what you're both looking for and where you might be willing to compromise is important to know before you begin negotiating, because there's not much value in negotiating towards something that you're not going to take. Dual accommodations take a lot of effort on the part of departments, and I appreciate that even more now that I'm hired. I know what work went into getting both of us here, and so being cognizant that you are actually going to take a position that is negotiated at the end of that process is really important. The last thing I'll say is know your plans for disclosing your marital status. You do not have to disclose your marital status. It's not, if someone asks you, that's not a question that a hiring committee or someone in a department should be asking, but it's up to you whether or not you choose to disclose and at what point you choose to disclose. In my limited experience, my partner and I did not disclose. There are some people who will disclose in your application letter. From this point on, obviously I'm talking about this here and now, so you all know I am married and that if I'm looking for a job, it's with another person. But when we were first on the market, this wasn't quite as much of a concern. I think of the 4 schools I interviewed at, one of them did not know that I had a partner straight away. I think the other 3 did, although they never raised it. They waited for me to raise it myself. I did do it in all of my interviews because if it was a non-starter for them, then after a flyout, we didn't need to spend time negotiating if that wasn't something they were going to be able to do. So I will stop talking now. I'm happy to take more questions on this or talk more specifically about the intricacies of the negotiation process, but I'll stop now and I'll see if I can figure out my camera too.
Thanks so much, Anna. All right, so since Tim Beatty had to join us a little bit late coming from my candidacy exam, I'm going to ask Christine Wilson actually to go next to give us some tips on sort of developing your teaching portfolio and how to get your courses off the ground as you get started. Thanks.
Okay, and my camera may not work. I've been having some technical difficulties. So, but hopefully you can see, I'm sharing a screen with the title slide. So hopefully you can see that. Can you see that, Zoe?
Yes.
Joyce?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I want to talk a little bit about teaching and some things to think about typically after you've started your new position and your first position. And you get that first position, and some of you may have some teaching, advising, mentoring experience. Some people may not have any experience, and some people may have only experience as being a teaching assistant. And when you start that first position, there's a lot of stuff coming at you. I think at one time you've got your research program, teaching and or extension. If you have a 3-way appointment, you're learning probably the ins and outs of your new department, your university and the culture and the business office and just everything. So one thing I would definitely encourage you to do is put in some time thinking about your teaching program. And what is your teaching program going to be? And what I mean by that is, what will your teaching and learning program be? What is going to be your philosophy of your teaching program? What are going to be your goals of your teaching program? And I think that that's important regardless of whether you're teaching 1 course or you're teaching 4 courses, and whether you're teaching an undergraduate course or you're teaching a graduate course, or you have a mix of both. Thinking about what is your approach to teaching and what are your goals? And then following up on that, what's it going to take for you to be successful in the teaching and learning framework? What's important and what is going to work, and what is going to work for you? And part of that involves, figuring out your own teaching style and what you're comfortable with. You can't be somebody else. You have to be the best version of yourself that you can be. And different delivery mechanisms, different interactions with students, and you have to figure out the students and what's going to work for you. And then the other big question I'd encourage you to think about is, how are you going to contribute to a positive teaching and learning culture and preparing students for the future and at your institution where you're at. And so what are you going to do? And all of these clearly relate, but how are you going to make teaching and learning positive, and how are you going to stretch the students beyond who they are and what their skills and knowledge are when they come into your classroom, and how are you going to prepare them for the future? I would try to impress upon you that good teaching certainly takes thought and preparation, and quite a bit of thought and preparation. When I was a student, I remember that the associate dean at my home institution one of the things he always said was, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that quote has been attributed to a number of individuals, including one of my favorite people that it's attributed to is Pat Summitt, who was the women's basketball coach at the University of Tennessee for many, many years, and quite successful, but also known as being quite demanding as well. But extremely successful, and her players adored her and worked incredibly hard for her. But it was well known that she was very demanding. So why was she able to be so successful and be what people call demanding at the same time? Well, because her players, and you can read about it in her biography, her books, her players felt that she cared. They believed that she cared. They knew that she cared. And so that's where I start, is caring about your students and your interactions with them, and putting in some time, having enthusiasm and passion for your teaching program, and being genuine. Create a welcome and inclusive environment, display mutual respect for your students, be approachable, somehow, share of yourself. And some of that is just as simple as greeting students when they come into your classroom. And even just as simple as smiling at people, which during COVID times is maybe a bit more difficult when we're all wearing masks. But definitely finding a way to connect with those students. Communicate. I think communications are extremely important, and setting expectations for your students and communicating those from day one with that syllabus. I would recommend putting considerable time and effort into putting together your syllabus. That's your contract between you and the students in your class. And then, you can expect them to read it, but make sure that, in your interactions with them, that you go over your expectations, that they do read the syllabus. You're not going to read it to them, but make sure you point out what your expectations of them are. And that does not mean, that you have to make your course easy. In fact, I encourage people to make their courses very rigorous, but to communicate that I have high expectations in my course, and you're going to work hard, but you're going to learn a lot, and we're going to be in this together. And typically, I think if you're honest and clear, and you set the standard early, there aren't any issues typically with that. There may be, as always, some grumbling along the way, but they've known from day one what your expectations are, and you've been clear. Being consistent is extremely important, and not changing the rules of the game halfway into the game. So being consistent, and then communications also involve listening as well. I think your content of your course and your teaching is extremely important. And again, I said that this is going to take time and effort, being organized, being prepared for classes, and especially with our current students, more so than when I started teaching college 20 years ago, communicating the relevance and importance is extremely critical. I think, to me, that's always been important, but I think in order to motivate our students today, it's even more important. Not that, not just that, you need to do this ag finance homework, but you need to do this ag finance homework, and here's why. Your employers are going to expect you to be able to understand what they're talking about with the financial statements or whatever it might be, but communicating why it's important that we're doing this activity or why we're studying a specific topic. And then confidence. Speak up in your classes so that your students can hear you. If you need to use a microphone, by all means, use a microphone, but display confidence. Even if you're not 100% confident in yourself, do your best to display confidence. And again, creating that approachable environment and sharing of yourselves. Again, I think all of those relate. And my last comment there is be wise. If something doesn't seem right, or ask questions of your students. Trust your gut in many cases, as far as different sorts of situations. And I always want to believe the best in our students and in classes and in interactions. But I have been around long enough to know that there is some dishonesty out there. So, be wise. That's my comment. That's what the be wise comment is generally about. And, I truly believe that if you put in the time and effort and you care, and your students are able to interact with you, you have a really high probability of being successful and engaging those students and helping them transform themselves from whoever they were when they came to you to advancing their skills. So I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Christine. Next, we'll go to Tim Beatty from the University of California at Davis, who's going to talk to us about building up a research agenda as you get started.
You're muted, Tim.
Sorry, I spent the whole morning on Zoom. You'd think I'd learned to unmute. Okay, so I'm Tim Beatty from UC Davis, and I'm sort of filling in for Mark Belmar, and he couldn't be here, and so I am a now recovering editor of the AJE, and here to talk a bit about building up a research portfolio. And so I think the key thing to take away is you will have many more research ideas than you have time to execute them. So I think one of the hallmarks of being a successful researcher is learning how to choose where to spend your time. I mean, sort of the joke I often tell is, you'll have 1,000 research paper ideas in your career, but you only have time to write 100. And so most of the sort of good research topics you think of, you're not going to have time to work on. And so it's really important to be able to distinguish between those that are worth your time and those that aren't. And so I'm going to sort of go through a couple of sort of strategies I use and to help me sort of select amongst topics, or how I suggest to students they should think about choosing amongst topics. So, the first, it's worth defining, what makes a good research question. So the first sort of thing is, is this question important? And so importance is obviously subjective. So what do I mean when I say important? So obviously important questions are things that, if it's a particular policy, it's, if something changes, many people are made worse off. And it may not be everybody is made worse off, but it may be particular subgroups are made worse off. So there are often groups we care particularly about. So for example, children, perhaps the elderly, if they're made worse off. Is the question controversial? Are people talking about it? Is it a really common topic? Is it something that involves large outlays of social resources? I think in general, if lots of people care a little, or that's often a good topic. Or if a few people care a lot, that may also be a good topic. So if there's a small group of people who really care a lot about a topic, that may be an important question. So my own work, I work on index number theory. And I assure you, I suspect everyone, half of you just instantly fell asleep when I mentioned index number theory. If I'm optimistic, half of you. And so, but there are a few people who really care about it because it is really important and it involves large outlays of social resources. And so I always think those questions are important. So you've got a research idea, what should you do with it? My general advice is, as you're thinking about it, try to write an elevator pitch for that idea. And so, what that means is write, a 3 to 5 minute sort of spiel about that idea, and really kind of spell out sort of what is your precise research question, not poverty. What is the precise research question you're trying to answer? Again, why is this important? Why should anyone in the real world care about it? Why should your fellow economists care about it? Relative to what we know already, what do we learn from what you're proposing to do? And then how will you know? So it's never too early to start thinking about your research design. And again, you might have a great question that's really important, but it's a fundamentally unanswerable question. And so, that's great. It's an important question, but you can't answer it. So, questions you should embark on are ones that you should see a way clear to answering. What's the most important result you think you're going to find? And just sort of as a tip, generally avoid questions that are only interesting if you find a particular answer. So if you're interested in demand analysis, generally speaking, if it's only interesting if demand slopes up, people are going to be pretty suspicious if you find demand slopes up. Then I would say, you've been sitting in your room writing your elevator pitch. Now take your elevator pitch to, I would say, 2 groups of people. The first is, it's always worth trying to ask whether, your friends who are not economists find what you're working on is interesting. If you can articulate what you're working on in a way that makes sort of an educated person who's not an economist interested in it, that's a good first step. And then, now take it to your sort of peers, right? Take it to your classmates, take it to your advisor, take it to your senior colleagues, and try to get them interested in it. And if you can get both groups of sort of your non-economist friends and your economist friends thinking this is a reasonable topic, at that point you should be thinking that this is an idea that's worth your time. On the other hand, if you can't convince your friends that this is an important topic and your economist friends don't seem to think it's important, that's a real red flag, and you should be thinking really carefully about whether it's worth your one of 100 papers you want to write and not move on to a different idea. So just some broad advice. How do you come up with these questions? Learn the institutional details of the area you're interested in. It's often sort of reading through weird how programs are managed that you come across just interesting quirks, and those quirks can kind of lead to interesting research questions. talk to people who are sort of practitioners in the area. So if you're interested in particular programs, talk to the people administering those programs. If you're interested in, farmers, talk to farmers. These are the people, find out what's interesting and important to them. And the questions they're interested in are not always going to be good questions for you to answer, but understanding why they're interested in those questions is often going to sort of lead you to something as an economist you may find interesting. And then, for many of us, we have the great good fortune of being in land-grant schools, and we have sort of biological science colleagues who we can talk to. It's interesting to know what they're working on. Like, how are these people who are really smart spending their time? Like, what do they view as the big problems in their field? And again, talking to a lettuce breeder is unlikely to lead you directly to a question, but understanding the concerns that the lettuce breeder is trying to address for their clientele is often really important. Something I read on Twitter the other day is, look for gaps in the literature, but realize that gaps are endogenous. So just because you don't see papers in an area, there's two potential explanations. One is you found a gap in the literature, and good job on you. The other one is that lots of people have tried and failed in this general area. So just be a little cautious about that. I'm almost out of time, but I think it's important. One of the sort of important things to do is avoid unforced errors. You can have a great idea, but it's worth executing it well. We often see papers that are generally good questions and potentially answered well, but they're a series of just easy to avoid mistakes that really knock down the quality of the paper, and so avoid those. There's really no one way to do research or to generate research questions, and so there's lots of pathways to success, but it's a question of finding one that works for you. So with that, I will turn it back to Joyce.
Thank you so much. I'll just add a couple of things I wish that I had known earlier on in my careers. One is that preparing your research portfolio is sort of like going on the job market, in the sense that you kind of want to work backwards, right? So thinking about which year you're going up for tenure evaluation or promotion, thinking about what your longer term goals are. Do you want to move, institutions, move industries, and then kind of working backwards from there? It's because the one thing that's different from the job market is that here you're really building a portfolio as opposed to just focusing on one or two really strong papers. So now we'll turn it over to Kathleen Lang from North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, who's going to talk a little bit about working with stakeholders, which is a feature that's really unique to ag and applied econ departments.
Hi, Joyce. If you can hear me, show me a thumb up.
I definitely can.
Great. Thank you so much for organizing the session. And it's really a nice opportunity to share some of my experiences in working with stakeholders. I'm Kathleen Liang, the Kellogg Distinguished Professor of Sustainable Agriculture and the Director of Center for Environmental Farming Systems with North Carolina A&T. And we are the largest historical Black college and university in the land-grant system in the country. We also have the largest College of Agriculture among all the HBCUs. Now, I'm glad that Tim brought up the research issue, and now I'm just going to follow and build on his perspectives to share the research point of view, because he had a few keywords relating to the stakeholders concept. He mentioned the practitioners, he mentioned the stakeholders, he also mentioned the people working in the field, like farmers, industry people, government agencies, that kind of thing. And they are all in the group called the stakeholders. People ask me, who are stakeholders? My question for them is, who are you talking about? Because the answer is it depends. The stakeholders are the general public or private individuals and organizations working on certain issues with a specific agenda. These are the people holding the stakes to make decisions or appropriate resources. Most likely, these people are outside academia. Now, earlier I saw Emma ask the question about extension, and I also saw people's responses to the questions of extension. If you apply for a position with any component of the extension outreach capacity, then you will be required and very likely to be in touch with the stakeholders outside the university or college boundaries. What stakeholders want? Really simple. They want you to solve some kind of problems, whether you know about the problems or whether you're capable of solving the problems. If they give you a phone call, they want you to solve some kind of problems. These problems are usually narrowly defined by specific purposes and the missions based on different individuals, different communities, and different organizations. It's very, very different from being in school. When you're in school, the teachers will give you a subject, a topic, or any questions that you all work together or individually and give you sufficient time. Unfortunately, when you work with stakeholders, you don't have that luxury. How stakeholders work. Remember these 5 words, SMART, S-M-A-R-T. I teach entrepreneurship, and the SMART goal is very popular among business people. SMART also applies to the strategies of working with stakeholders because that describes how stakeholders work. They're outcome driven and they usually get into a very chaotic situation. What they're looking for somebody to help them to solve problems are number one, to be as specific as possible when you present a solution. Number two, you have to introduce measurable outcomes. You cannot be vague. Number three, these outcomes need to be achievable with very limited time and the resources. Number four, these outcomes need to be reasonable, or the approaches to reach these outcomes need to be reasonable. If you make it too fancy, then people will not understand what the solution could be or the impact would be. Number five is the most important factor to work with the stakeholders, timely. You have 3-4 years to finish a PhD dissertation. When you work with the stakeholders, it cut down to 3 days. They give you a phone call right now. They calling you again in 3 days. Hey, what happened? You know, we are looking for people to lifetime here. Okay, that timely is very, very critical. Now, there are a couple simple things that I have accumulated over the years to work with stakeholders. For most of you, I'm sure you are born after I joined the AAEA. I've been with the AAEA since 1988, and I've been with the CWAE for as long as the CWAE had existed. Now you're thinking, well, Kathleen is a dinosaur. I'm probably a dinosaur. So, but throughout my career, I work with a lot of different group of stakeholders, and I have 3 things to share with you. Then I have a short survey at the end of my presentation, see how you want to proceed in your career perspective. Number 1, please take advantage of any opportunities you can get at this point in time to acquire real life experiences. When you work with stakeholders, they are not interested in reading journal articles. Journal articles will get you as far as the tenure promotion perspectives. Journal articles very, very unlikely will get to the communication part with the stakeholders. If you have a journal article, if you have any research outcomes, please practice to convert the message into usable information for problem solving strategies. And that you need a lot of practice. So like a team said, working with the people in the field, the farmers, anybody in the real working capacity will help you to acquire that skill and that experience. Number 2, please understand the differences between academic work and the reality. I already mentioned this. We teach you very well in doing math, doing financial modeling, doing simulation, all kinds of big data, architecture, design stuff. All it comes down is what are you going to do with your knowledge and the skill to help people to solve problems. COVID-19 is the best example. COVID-19 interrupted and disrupted the food systems significantly in this country. I received a phone call from the pig farmers. In North Carolina, our swine pig industry ranked #2 in the country. And this farmer is looking for somebody who can help him to sell 4,000 pigs, including piglets to mommy pigs, all in a few days. Otherwise, they are all going to be euthanized, which means they're all going to be put to sleep. When you face a situation like that, there's no school knowledge will prepare you for a situation like that, but with your experience, your knowledge, and your network, that's achievable, because I actually made it happen helping this farmer selling 4,000 pigs within 48 hours with a cooperative extension and our centers people, staff, all working together, and we made it possible for this farmer. And this is just one example how you need to keep your mindset on that timely manner, and you don't have extra resources, but you have to deal with a very chaotic and a confusing scenario most of the time when you work with the stakeholders. Finally, please be flexible when you use your knowledge and the skills. Our degree only represent an education level that our school defines us. It does not represent your capacity, your talent, and your future development. I've never thought one day that I will have to sell pigs or I actually have to work on a farm. Today, I just came back to the farm. So I don't want to show you my video because you're going to see a fur ball that's in a very dirty clothes, okay? I am a practicing farmer, not by choice, but just because the way I have to as an economist to help farmers to solve problems. So tailor your working style that meets the most important issues when you work with stakeholders. That will help you very, very far in your career as a scholar, as an educator, and as a person that people will respect. So to close my presentation, I want to ask everybody here who are students or junior colleagues, it doesn't matter, anybody can participate, is I have a short survey for you. The survey question is, what is your preferred working environment in your first job? Or what was it? You can type your answers in the chat box. So what is your preferred working environment as your first job, okay? You put a 1 in there if you like to work in the school. You put a 2 in there if you want to work with the industry or government agencies. Now put a number 3 in there, you say, I don't care, whatever is available. Or number 4, I really don't know, I haven't even thought about that far. Could you please put your answers in there? Because I'm paving the way for our next presenter who's going to talk about work-life balance. I think this survey result will show him a little bit more richness of our audience. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. So our final presenter is going to be Ariel Ortiz to talk a little bit about mental health and work-life balance. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Joyce. So can you see my slides and my face? Am I showing my face? Yeah.
Yes, perfect.
Okay. How do I kick the chat out of my screen? Let me. Okay, so thanks for having me. Just start my clock so that I know that. So I'm Ariel Ortiz Bobea, and I'm now I was going to say associate professor at Cornell. And I'll try to jump very quick to tips because I don't have a lot of time. But before I start, I want to say that my outlook on this is going to be very limited. Okay, so I don't do research on mental health. I'm not an expert on it. I haven't been diagnosed with a mental health illness, which means that generally you learn way more about mental health, you know, when you're diagnosed with one. So, but I do think, even though I'm, you know, don't know much about this is that, well, I've struggled with mental health like anyone, like many people have. And I think it is important to normalize these conversations at all levels, the students and faculty and departments and everywhere, so that these discussions are not just a simple footnote. And then we take these just as seriously as all the other challenges that we have in our profession. So with that being said, when talking about work-life balance, I rather than just talk about balance, I want to focus mostly on mental health. There's a typo there. And the reason that I'm going to present things in this way is that my theory, at least, is that struggles with work-life balance generally reflect mental health issues. So that's how I feel that is, how things work. And so I'm gonna focus more on mental health as a more a sort of a fundamental source of issues that get translated into challenges with work-life balance. And one of the examples that I want to give is that I've used work, I've overworked in the past as a refuge for me to control my anxiety. So sometimes work is what brought me my anxiety levels down, but in a way, it was felt, poor strategies that I adopted that got me to the anxiety generating activities in the first place. And I'll talk about sort of tips how to avoid some of the things that I didn't do very well myself. And one of the reasons why overworking is not good, is not sustainable, is that you're basically becoming less productive when you're burnout. Okay, so it's not only not good, it's not enjoyable. It makes every activity just more miserable. So there's ways to try to avoid this, and then I think focusing on trying to keep a healthy mind is a way to get there. So I'm not going to talk about sources of stress. Even having this list might create some more stress. So there's a lot going on, especially nowadays with the job market, especially the job market candidates right now. But there's so many things that can cause you stress, in the tenure track, or starting as a junior researcher, in not only academia but also in government and elsewhere. And here are some tips, right, that I'm going to give you. That I'm going to go down the list just to try to tackle this. So the first one is to understand your fundamentals. What I mean by that is, what is the deep reason why you're getting a PhD? Okay, and things like, I want to be a professor, I don't think that's a deep reason enough to understand. I think you really need to understand what you really like about doing research, and what are you seeking every day? What is it that you like on a daily basis that having a research degree will get you? Are you trying to seek flexibility? Are you trying to you're curious, or you get bored very quickly when you just do the same, one thing and the same thing every day, and then you want to be able to be surprised every day? Is it interaction with other people, particularly students? Do you want to help others? Are you trying to impress someone, your parents, or you feel like you have to do this in order to have everyone happy around you? Or you're trying to impress yourself? Whatever the reason is, try to really understand why are you here, because that understanding will help you focus more on what is essential, and will help you to handle the noise around you. Okay. And the reason that I say that is that there are multiple paths to the place that you really want to be in. So if you start I want to be in academia, okay, I want to be a professor, okay, maybe what you want can be reached in very different ways. So I encourage you to try to understand exactly what is it that you want, the daily life that you want to have, and then you might actually find out that academia is not the only way to get there, or might actually be definitely not the place to get you there. And then there are other paths that are perhaps even more satisfying, either working on government, industry, a think tank, or NGOs, or any other job, okay, or just starting a farm or whatever. Okay, so there's many paths that can take you spot. So remember that your first job is just a new chapter, so not the last one. So you know, you always keep your mind open to these other doors are open to you. The second tip is to appreciate your identity. And what I mean by that is that there's a difference between who you are and what you do, okay? So you are a full person beyond your title and your work, okay? You are a full person, irrespective of what you do. So you're not your papers, you're not your job market paper, you're not your dissertation, okay? So those are two separate things. And it's sometimes difficult early on when you spend too much time on, say, your job or your studies to feel like those are two different things, but they are different things. And then you should try to nurture the part of your identity that is unrelated to your job, okay? So whether that's having, you know, cultivate your relationship with non-economists, okay? As economists, we tend to talk always about work, and then, you know, just don't do that, okay? Have other types of friends or significant others, or, you know, so you get to choose those, right? Do activities that are related to your occupation, and then keeping in touch with, you know, with old friends, okay? People who are outside, so just have something going on, you know, family, whatever that is outside and that brings you joy, okay? Outside of work. Another tip is don't go it alone, okay? Then first of all, if you're ever struggling, you ask for help. You don't fight any fight on your own, no matter how small. Well, I don't want to say no matter how small. If you're struggling with mental health, you have to ask for help. Like you don't have to fight it on your own, okay? And you're likely to struggle if you're just going on large projects or challenging tasks on your own. So one strategy is to team up with others before you actually get to struggle, okay? So for instance, if you're working on projects that as you enter the tenure track, or you're working on your first few projects, like 6 co-authors who can mentor you, okay? So and those that are more experienced than you can help you figure out which fights you can fight and which ones not to fight and how to fight them. And I can give you examples of myself single authoring a paper that I suffered a lot through. And I think it was a terrible mistake on my part to actually try to go on my own on that paper. I would have been much happier with a more senior co-author who would have told me, like, just stay away from these comments, focus on this, and then keep me sort of a little bit sane. The tip number 4 is to develop your own coping mechanisms. Rejection and lack of positive feedback is the norm, unfortunately, in academia. So you have to cultivate this mental, sort of state of mind where you try to give your best, but always expect, you know, rejection. For grants, for papers, for jobs, it's just the norm. So in a way, like you celebrate when you get it, like as if you played the lottery, but you buy the ticket. Okay, so you have to kind of develop that way, because otherwise it's just too taxing. And so you just, just got rejected, and try to move on, and that will build your skin thicker and thicker. Some tips in terms of trying to develop on-ramps to virtual cycles and off-ramps and roadblocks to vicious cycles. So in the same way, when you want to, say, jog, and you want to really jog every day and you can't do it, you take your shoes out and you put it next to your bed. You make it easy to put on those shoes and just head out. Or if you just want to, eat less or not eat junk food, you hide them, behind the closet or some place where it's hard to reach. So that's what I mean by developing these on-ramps and off-ramps or roadblocks. So one example in real life is just surround yourself with people who are kind to you and others, so that they make you feel good, okay? And you avoid those that just bring you down, okay? And sort of job market rumors forum. So I'll try to jump to tip number 5. Very important, aim to stay physically healthy. This model actually is misspecified, but because there should be an interaction between body and mind, okay? So they're not just additive. So you have to exercise every day, and you shouldn't allow any excuses, okay? Just like walking 30 minutes, you need that, okay? That's like part of your production function. And sleep, I've never regretted like sleeping. that's one like time that you will never regret having too much of. And then I think this is the final one that I think is very important, is to nurture a positive outlook about others and yourself. So sometimes we have, we're animals, we have these feelings that come and then we have impulses, but we have to try to fight some of these when, especially the zero-sum game mentality, that, oh, this person is doing better than me. So, you see them as a competitor, like don't do that. Think about them as, peers, colleagues, potential co-authors in the future, and try to change that mindset. And then try to, when you admire someone, do it without drawing a comparison to yourself, and then not feeling like, oh, they're doing just better than me every time, because there's always someone's going to be, having more papers, have more grants, have a fancier job, and that will never end. So try not to fall into those traps. And last but not least, be kind to others, and do that always, and practice if you have to. Okay, so that's what I have for today. And thank you for your time. So you can write me on Twitter too, and then I'm happy to talk to people offline as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I'll just add to that, I think as we've been seeing more and more discussion about diversity, equity, and inclusion in our profession, this relates to this question of mental health too. I think in the past we have tended to, as economists, we're inclined to think that there are these objective truths and that there are objective quality measurements, and that simply is not true. There is some objectivity. There's also a significant amount of subjectivity. And so, you should not be evaluating yourself based on what you might perceive as objective measurements without acknowledging how much subjectivity is involved in the metrics that are commonly used still in our profession. So we'll turn to our Q&A portion now. And if panelists, if you don't mind turning on your videos, that would be great. And let's see, several things were already addressed in the online Q&A by folks. One, I thought that might be good for the panel to address more is questions about what to expect when meeting with college dean or other people outside of the unit that you're interviewing with directly. So that both in and outside academia, kind of what are the other types of questions that you might want to prepare for in an interview or fly out.
Joyce, I already responded in the chat, but can also mention that what I said verbally. What I see, I have found in my experience that these are times when the deans are explaining a lot about the expectations of the position. Well, there may be questions that that they ask that I think are important. It's important for you to understand the structure of the college and what kind of college it is, and whether it's a policy school or a college of agriculture, environment, food. Know enough about the orientation of the school so you're somewhat prepared for what types of questions they might have, stakeholders they might have. But also I see that this is a great opportunity to for meetings with deans to ask about how the department fits into the bigger picture of the college and of the university, and plans for the department, for the college, for the university that the folks in the department might not be focused on or may not even want. And I think it's important to know about those external pressures that are being faced by the department and how they could affect you in the future if you are a faculty member there.
Joyce, this is Kathleen. I just want to follow up. Nowadays, it becomes more and more popular to have non-academic people sitting in the search meetings or serving on search committees as a stakeholder representative. It's a very challenging for a new PhD or a young candidate that without too much experience working in particular industries or working with particular community initiatives to respond to the stakeholder questions. For example, the stakeholder questions will involve a particular type of practice or a certain name of the programs that you may not be familiar with. When you run into a situation like that, just be polite, saying that I would look into more information, and that seems to be an interesting idea, or the concept is very intriguing. Use more diplomatic answers to guide yourself to build up your confidence. You don't need to feel bad. Oh shoot, I screw up the interview because I don't know the answer to the questions. Nobody expects you to be a superhuman that you knows everything. That's not possible. In the interview process, people pay more attention to your reactions and your responsiveness to the questions, not necessarily looking for an answer from the candidate. So just relax and practice of saying more diplomatic answers. You will be all right. Thank you.
I mean, I think also in that context, you can say maybe you don't have experience with that particular problem solving, but you have other experiences in problem solving that could help you sort of be able to figure out how to do research on those other topics. So I think you have to be you have to think outside of the box and be prepared to say, how does your narrow research and maybe it doesn't, but maybe there's a way to connect how your little narrow research question on your thesis sort of prepared you for working on research in this other area.
I think on the job market too, it's really important to match quality is really important, especially the way the econ market works, right? There's a lot of timing issues. It's a very small window. People are concerned about having offers turned down and that sort of thing. So you really want to do a lot, I think, to signal your interest in a position. And part of that is doing your homework when meeting with these stakeholders and deans and that kind of thing too.
Yeah. This is Titus Awukushe from Michigan State. I just want to add a few things to what has already been said. When interviewing with administrators, especially deans, I think it's important to be aware of who your audience is. In most cases, there are a few exceptions. Most people in the dean's office are not economists or ag economists. So it's important to use language that is more generic and more general when relating to non-economists. One of the things that administrators are also interested in is trying to get a signal from you with regards to how well you collaborate with other people and how well you understand the broad issues. They are interested in the policy issues that lend themselves to collaborative, multidisciplinary engagements. So if you speak to issues and interest in working with economists and non-economists, and you could have some specifics in other departments, it could be topics that allows for collaboration with people in Department of Animal Science, entomology, or something like that. You win some brownie points like that because they can see the potential for leadership in terms of scholarship that is collaborative. So that's important. Another point that I want to make too that is really important to administrators is that they are interested in scholarship. They're also interested in the resources that are needed to get scholarship done. So they want to know if you've given some thoughts to where you'll be applying for grants and what kind of grants you think can support the kind of research that you want to do. Now, this may require talking to some senior faculty members in your home department before going on the interview to the interview. But I think it's very important to be aware of who your audience is and the kind of issues that are of interest to them. Those same issues that are interesting to deans are also of interest to department chairs too.
Great, thank you. New question in the chat. that I think many of our panelists could probably chime in on. What do you do until you find a good research question? And is there a way to narrow your scope down to a good question? This is addressed to Tim specifically, but I'm sure everyone has their own suggestions.
So a good research question is one that you can answer. I think when you're getting started, you tend to start with very, very broad, sort of kind of almost open-ended questions. And just as you progress through your career, you'll sort of start chipping away at sort of, you know, the sort of the big block of marble, right, that eventually contains the statue. And you want to get right down to like chip away all of the extraneous stuff and find what is the precise. I mean, I'm often very motivated by the very specific research question. And that's what kind of gets me excited. It's like I'm wandering around and I see something weird and I'm like, oh, that's sort of strange. And then I'll often spend a lot of time thinking like, well, if I answered this question, what would I learn about economics? And so I'm a very, almost to my own sort of detriment, very detail, small question kind of person. Like I really want to answer the very small question. And once I've sort of completely answered that small question, I'm going to figure out how it relates to a much bigger question and a much bigger topic. But I think always starting with what's the immediate question you're answering is the place to go. Not the big topic. Like what is the specific policy you're looking at? What is the, ideally, this was told to me as a grad student, what's the yes, no question? Like what's the sharp hypothesis test you're looking to run? And once you get to that point, then build it back into the literature. So I'm very bottom up, like what's the very narrow thing? And then make the connection from that very narrow thing to a much broader area of economics. And what do we learn about big areas of economics from this very narrow answerable question?
There's a question about collaborations. Should I take it, Joyce?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. So follow up on Ariel's comments. Can you share your advice on how to meet approach potential research partners given the pandemic, like a list of do's and don'ts? So generally collaborators early on when you're starting out, they're people that are around you. So we're talking about like professors and possibly classmates or former advisors. That's generally how things start. And over time, you start creating new connections in conferences, just because people are either complementary to your to what you do or have similar interest, and you create kind of a buddy relationship with those people, right? And you can over a drink or over a walk, you can start shooting ideas, and it's a fun part of being a researcher and working with other people. So things that I think that something that is very important when having a collaboration is setting expectations. So say that you're approaching someone that you say already know. Generally, like out of the blue, people don't know you, they don't know exactly, if there's going to be a good fit. So generally you have to know the person in some way or another. It's difficult in the pandemic, right? So, but it gets easier as you gain more experience and exposure in conferences. So attend the AAEA conference always, right? So you have to be, show up at the conferences. And one thing is setting expectations. So when you're I've done this. So write to a colleague, it's like, hey, I have this idea, and I think that it would be great if we collaborate on this project. I already have this in mind. This is what I would expect from you in this project. So I set it up so that they don't see that it's an open-ended thing, and then I have some very specific things that I would expect from them if they accept to the invitation. Hope that helps.
There's a question about how useful this advice is outside of academia. So I I guess I have experience on both sides, and I would say that you need to have an elevator pitch about your job market paper if you want to go to any of these research institutions like IFPRI or the World Bank or even Resources for the Future. You need to have a polished paper. You need to probably spend more time convincing the people in the search committee why your question is policy relevant and how it can be extended in other ways, or to test other hypotheses that might be really policy relevant. And also at many of these places, they really want to see that you have field experience, because a lot of what they do is sort of being in the field and working with ministers of agriculture. And so your experience in the field or even experience before graduate school might make you seem like a more desirable candidate than someone that doesn't have those experiences. Also, I would say that you should spend more time. So Zoe had said the tidbit about informational interviews. I think that's really important if you want to meet people outside of academia and sort of decide which jobs are available and also what may be of interest to you after grad school. I think it would be a good time to start reaching out to people that have worked or are at IFPRI or World Bank or any of these other institutions and talk to them to see what jobs are out there, you know, what type of skills they're looking for, and just get more information and put yourself out there, especially now when we're not going to have conferences in person. I think the onus is going to be on you just to sort of reach out and connect with people, to sort of put yourself on the radar of other employers, excuse me.
And to add what Val said is that some of these organizations have, like the World Bank has research positions and non-research positions. So you have to know what you want. So if you want to be a researcher, then a lot of this is very relevant. I think it's a little bit more, yeah, it would be relevant. But you know, if you're working operations at the World Bank, yeah, this is less relevant. I think that your previous experiences are very important. Whether you worked in a ministry or something like that before going to grad school is definitely gonna help. So those are very different jobs, and it's obviously important that you know what you're getting into for those positions.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is, right, you really need to know your audience, right? You need to know where to pitch, how to pitch, right, and what kind of outcomes and deliverables they're looking for, right? And you need to be able to develop your portfolio to fit wherever you're at.
And I just want to say one more thing. I mean, we're talking about academic institutions, and we're talking about, I would call them think tanks or international organizations, but there are a lot of jobs out there that are in the private sector that also can sort of fulfill those research interests that you have in mind. They still allow you to do interesting research. Maybe the contributions won't be as novel as if you are in a top tier ag econ department. However, if you're still interested in being involved in research and working with implementing agencies, then there are a lot of outlets for this. You know, Mathematica, Apt Associates, there are a lot of opportunities for you to apply your skills in a real life setting that would still require a PhD.
One piece of advice I actually got when I was graduating was to think about how much you enjoyed the grad school experience. If you loved it, then, you know, maybe being a professor and staying in academia is a good fit for you. If it wasn't really your thing so much, you know, maybe a think tank would be a better fit, right? Where there's more collaboration, there's a little bit more direction on research projects, and you're not so isolated, right? So to reflect on your mental health during graduate school and what you perceive to be a good fit for the future.
Joyce, can I jump in?
Yeah.
Ben Greg had put something in the chat that I think only the panelists can see. So I wanted to quick reflect on that. And he had suggested that, you know, it's important to vet potential collaborators. And so I think this is, you know, touching on and building on what was just said. It's important to look at the cultures in various institutions, not just the day-to-day work, but the culture that you want to have. And I think this is probably top of mind for a lot of us right now with just what's happening in the country. We want to be in a place where we feel like we can express our views freely and safely. and be passionate kind of citizens and individuals, as well as doing our work. And so, you know, I'm going broader than what Ben said, but I think Ben's point was that, you know, there are people, unfortunately, whisper networks, these networks that are kind of where people, you know, say things behind the scenes, are how some of the information about people who are not great to work with in a variety of ways that's how that information gets around. So try to, you know, many of us are working on making the whisper networks public, but until that happens, do reach out and, you know, find out people who have worked before with certain collaborators, you know, the people that you trust, you know, how is that collaboration? How did that go? What's the culture like at this institution? Ask those questions because it's gonna really be worth it down the road.
Can I just jump in on collaborators? I think having just, as you're sort of building up your career, I think it's important to have a diversity of co-authors. I think if your CV is collinear with someone else's, and particularly with a senior person, that can be really problematic come tenure time. And so that's just something to be aware of. It's really important to be able, for people to be able to identify your contributions to particular work and sort of what you bring to a project. And, you know, that's, in the old days, Titus and I are probably old enough to remember that, you know, that was, you know, the mythical sole authored paper that you needed to have for tenure. That's simply not the case anymore. The sort of the modern version of that, though, is, you know, it's best to have a diversity of co-authors and a diversity across lots of dimensions. And so fields, ranks, you know, if all of your work is with senior people, that can be problematic. So just be aware of that. You know, if all your work is with your advisor, that's very problematic, frankly. So you need to build your independence from your dissertation advisor over time. It's fine to have a couple papers. I mean, you're encouraged to have a couple papers with your advisor, but over time you should be building an independent research profile.
I just want to add like a couple of broad comments that relates to some of the things that has been spoken. First, I know that most of the graduate students are interested in getting their foot in the door first. So I want to speak to the importance of communication and being very clear about and making the distinction between the techniques that you know, because you want to communicate that you are savvy in that regard. And this applies to both academia and industry. So you want to be able to say, yes, I got this training and I have these techniques that I'm good at using. And these are the kind of problems that my toolkit can help to address. So it's always important to connect the skill set you have to the real world problem that is important to that industry or important to that state or to that institution. So that's one. But complementary to that is also being able to show that you have a good sense of the policy environment that you're going to be working in. And this is particularly important when communicating with stakeholders and non-economists, because we are all dealing, for the most part, with the same societal problems. But we're wearing different lenses in the way that we approach those issues. And we also use different toolkit for the kind of analysis that we do. So you want to be able to say, yes, this is the problem. Being able to improve your ability to define societal problems and showing the relevance of your skill set and your training to that is a very important skill that is relevant for any kind of jobs that you may be applying for. So that's point number one. The second point that I want to make also relates to collaborations. This is after you've gotten the job. It is very important that you be aware of how you communicate your contribution on any project that you're on papers, on presentations, on grants, because not only is that important for you on your CV, but also as you communicate with people. For academic jobs, especially when you are up for promotion, uh, don't assume that people know what contribution you made. Now, if you are the first author in a field where first authorship means that you did most of the work, that makes sense. But even then, you still want to clearly uh, indicate how you contributed, because the people on the committee beyond your home department will be consisting of people that may not be aware of the practice in your own subfield. So I think it's very important. So the 2 points that I've made is really about communication and the skill set that is needed to communicate in different environments.
To build on to Titus' point, there is a question in the chat box about how important is a teaching experience if I'm interested in research extension appointments. Teaching relates to communication. Right now, most of the positions in academic, you will have the opportunity to teach something. School budget is very, very tight. And the department head, we got a few department heads sitting right here, and you will agree, you're trying to bunch a sufficient number of courses that ask people to teach, even though you know it's going to be tight. So as a new candidate, a new PhD, it is very important to have some sort of teaching experiences. You don't have to be an instructor of a course. You can ask your advisors, your supervisor, or team members, faculty members, to give you a chance to be a guest speaker, to take on a small lecture, just to tell your advisor, your faculty member that I like to try it and I know I can do this. Would you give me one class time period? I think people will be very happy to support you, to give you that opportunity, and give people a chance to practice, to do what exactly Titus just said. It's a practicing communication, not just about teaching, but to share the ideas and be able to translate the science into common sense kind of outcomes and impact statements. That will be very, very helpful. If there's a lab, computer lab or some, go volunteer to teach a lab. Anything counts as a teaching when it comes to communication, do different kind of things. And then to diversify the profile, it's also critical to work with the community partners. When you get a chance to go to Chamber of Commerce, right now everything is online and a lot of organizations are offering training online. AAEA has a mentorship committee and I'm the chair with that committee right now. So we do offer training for mentorship opportunities. I see a grant writing request earlier. We did a grant writing training course. It was a one whole day with the AAEA meeting. And I'll be happy to bring that up again with our committee member to offer that training again, grant writing. That's really, really important. Appreciate these questions. Thank you.
If there's time, I'll just add to what Kathleen had to say and stress the importance of the communication. Teaching and extension activities are engaging different audiences often, and often that engagement or that extension activity, you're taking your applied research and trying to communicate that, the applicability and how you're solving those problems for those stakeholders. So, if the teaching experience, like Kathleen said, any that you have, that should be a benefit to you in any of these types of positions, especially if you focus on the communications aspect of it and engaging with people, regardless of whether those are students, traditional students in a classroom, or stakeholders in a different type of classroom.
I know I haven't seen a specific question about this, but I'm going to raise the issue anyway, because it relates to the point I made in my prior presentation. And this is about knowing what is expected of you. Different organizations and different institutions have different expectations. And different job assignments also have different expectations. So I think it's important to always ask questions about what the expectations are during the interview. And once you have the job, it's also important to keep coming back to that. Different people have different sense of what the expectation is. You can learn from the grapevine and from talking to colleagues about what the practical, realistic expectations are as it's practiced within the context of a department. But it's also important to read the guidelines that are provided by the institution. Talk to the department chair, especially if you have a 2- or 3-way appointment. What do you expect and how will I be evaluated for the extension piece of my appointment? If I do things online, how would you measure impact? Those kind of things are very important. For promotion and tenure in an academic department, most of the time people don't have things spelled out very, very clearly, but there is some range to what the expectations are. And you can always look at people who are promoted most recently, but asking questions and being aware of what the expectations are and how they're changing and how the bars are moving is really important to ensure success in your role when you get it and where you get it.
There was a question in the chat about recording of this talk. We are recording it, and I think we just have to figure out if we can send it to the attendee list or if we can just post it on Box or something and have it available to anyone through the listserv. So we will definitely follow up on that because we know that a lot of folks might not be able to, might not have seen everything, and we want to make this all accessible. So thanks for that question.
I think we are wrapping up this session. We're already 15 minutes after the intended end. So does anyone have any last minute questions that they'd like to ask before we have lunch or take off? Okay, if there aren't any more questions, I guess I want to say thank you for attending this session, and we hope this was helpful. I think one thing that I learned was there's a lot more interest in jobs outside of the university and also maybe outside of the United States. And I think maybe going forward, it might be useful to have a session that sort of targets how to prepare for the job market outside of academia and outside of the US. And maybe we can arrange something like that in a future conference.
That would be great.
Does anyone else have anything to add before we take off on the panel? No? All right. Well, thank you. And hopefully see you again in person at a future AEA conference.
Yes.
Bye.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Everyone.